them have as much time as possible. So over to you, Aditi ji.
Thank you, Chandraji. Welcome back after a short coffee tea break. I now welcome Dr. Maya Joshi to share her thoughts on the craft and science of translation. Maya ji teaches English literature at her alma mater, Lady Shri Ram College, but also researches at the intersection of literature, philosophy, and intellectual history, especially of the Indian subcontinent. Her special area of interest has been Buddhist culture and philosophy and the polymathic figure of Rahul Sankrityayan, whom she has translated, edited, and critically engaged with over 20 years. Her research has been supported by the Charles Wallace Trust Grant and most recently by the Fulbright Nehru Postdoctoral Scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania, where she worked on an intellectual biography of Sankrityayan, often described as the father of Hindi travel writing. She has been invited to deliver talks at universities like UC Berkeley, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Smith, Middlebury, and Williams Amherst and Haverford colleges, besides universities and learning centers across India. Her publications include a critically engaged translation of Sankrityayan's Bes- Biswi Sadi, Baiswi Sadi. Baiswi Sadi, a critical edition of his iconic Volga to Ganga, as well as analytic and comparative studies of his life and over. Among her other publications are a critical edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and a co edited volume on Buddhist philosophy. She enjoys reading widely and traveling beyond geographic, linguistic, generic, and disciplinary boundaries. We both have our teacher, Dr. Trivedi, with us today.
Thank you, Guru Behan. So yeah, let me start with that on that point that I'm here partly because of Professor Trivedi, I guess. Like many of us, we started off on a journey of translation with the course that he offered, the pioneering course on translation, and there's a long history to the expansion of the English syllabus, which I won't go into. And I do teach a course currently on Indian literature in translation. I have 6 of my students from that course attending this seminar, and I will address, today that question of being a teacher. But I'm also here as a reviewer. In fact, my journey, my first ever publication was with the book review, and it was a translation that I was, asked to do of an essay on Prayag Shukla's poetry. And after that, it was a series of translated texts for some reason that I was asked to review. So there was David Rubin's World of Premchand, there was Pachpan Kamre Lal Diware, there were, Tomb of Sand, of course, Red Samadhi. And in each case, and there were several others, I found myself, compulsively reading the original and doing this rather pedantic exercise of, comparative study and asking myself that, in this postmodern world where, we're transcreating and every text has a meaning, what is the point of this kind of, fine reading? And I think it has a point. I think I do want to assert this question and the value of what we call fidelity to the text. It's been much derided and I think it's important, especially when we are talking about, very sensitive issues and texts which have a particular political stance and ideological position. It's our responsibility to be true as far as possible to the vision of the author. So some of these issues I will take up as a translator, teacher, and reviewer. So the question of what we choose to translate is very important, as Iraji pointed out. I chose to work on Rahul Sankrityayan, and it's a labor of love. Baiswi Sadi is the text that I chose to translate, and it's a very unusual work of utopian science fiction. It's actually been published in an anthology of science fiction, the Golan's book of South Asian science fiction. But it was actually a utopian vision of the future that he, as a very young man, sitting in a colonial jail, British colonial jail, inspired by the Russian Revolution, but also with some kind of an idea of a revived India. So Nalanda is revived in it. There's a Buddha image which inspires him. He's not yet a Buddhist, he's an Arya Samaji. And I found it utterly fascinating because it was, and I did it in 1918. I mean, it's published in 1918 is when it sort of gets started, and 2018 is when I was actually asked to translate it. So it was fascinating to see how far we've regressed, from that period. So, so these are very important interventions, I feel, in our understanding of ourselves, as Indians, as members of the human community, essentially, because he was also an internationalist. So we choose the text we translate, these are interventions. They're personal, they're political, and they must necessarily be, carefully done. I'm very happy to say that some years ago I heard from somebody teaching South Asian studies in Canada, saying that, oh, they've picked this up and they want to use it as a text. And do I give them permission, etc. So that was wonderful because one was able to give that text a life beyond its origin. Many people in India haven't read it. So that's something that we can do as translators. As a reviewer, as I mentioned, there's several books that I've reviewed, and in each case I find myself doing this quite unnecessary, perhaps pedantic exercise of looking at the original and worrying about it. So Tomb of Sand particularly, I remember going into the whole question of samadhi and tomb, and what actually Rockwell does is to give in her epigraph, she lists meditation, trance, and tomb. She actually does this little extraneous exercise of indicating that she's aware that samadhi is not quite tomb, but it has so many implications. So, and of course one celebrates translation. Translation literally means, if you go to the etymology of it, it is, saints who died were translated into heaven. So I love that, to play with that idea, because a translated text has died in a sense, but it has also entered the translated heaven, as it were, of a wider readership. So it's a dual process. It's interesting to think about that. Now, this question of fidelity to the text and how it can change. Food is one thing, to start on a lighter mode. Very difficult to translate food. We have David Rubin, The World of Premchand, making his delightful gourmand, Premchand's delightful gourmand, Pandit Motiram, crave and indulge in such delicacies as pastry and fudge and rasgullas, and in the holy city of Banaras, right? You have to cringe. Similarly, in Man's Highest Duty, people are gobbling up pancakes and halwa, during Holi. While Pandit Motiram salivates over Jaunpur nectars, Agra pearl drops, Mathura creams, rasgullas from Lucknow, rose apple candy from Ayodhya, and Delhi halwa. Such unintended culinary hybridity has one running to the originals to try to attempt a decoding. Ye hai kya bhai? What the hell are they talking about? So one wonders, and there are some real challenges there. So sometimes it leaves a bad taste in the mouth. The transcriptions into the Roman script sometimes are also phonetically inaccurate, and that creates its own problems. But there are other more substantial issues. I'm reading directly. I actually dug out my old copy of a published review from the book review to celebrate that. For instance, in the story, Kafan, you have these guys. Just in Thakur Ka Kuan, you actually have the play on Thakur as both God and Thakur, right? And that is operating at a different level. That's not conveyed. In the Shroud, these two father-son paired, Ghisu and Madho, spend all the money they collect from the villagers for Budhya's shroud, and the conversation turns to Dawa Daru, which of course is a lovely compound word, which seamlessly leads both the men as well as the Hindi reader to the steps of the liquor shop, right? Which Premchand rather poetically calls Madhushala. Simply because the word for liquor, daru, is contained in the larger compound word for Dawa Daru. In Rubin's literal rendering of it as medicine, this is entirely lost, right? You don't get that play that you would otherwise get. So some of these are rather obvious losses, if you will. In Pachpan Khambe, I found some very glaring issues. Bachpan Khambe Lal Diware is based on the college that I studied at and teach at. So you have this woman who's a teacher, she's a single woman, and she has to be, she's offered the job of a warden of this hostel, girls' hostel. And she has a close friend who taunts her for her coyness. And she says that, your colleagues are sex-starved. And this girl goes all red in the face, and she says to her, "Aise to tum kaam kar chuki." Like, if you're like this, you'll never be able to work, right? That's what she's saying. Daisy Rockwell translates this as, "You've done such things before." So what has happened is, I tried to figure it out. "Aise kaam to tum pehle kar chuki ho" is how she's reading. So it's a placement of the to that is changing the meaning, right? Similarly, so it's so tone deaf to the inflections of spoken Hindustani that I wonder if it is really a problem of, having learned the language as a second language. And it loses the entire dynamic of the relationship of Meenakshi, her friend, and herself, and her character. Then you have another scene where Neil, her male friend, who's younger than her, is referred to. You have this, she's dissecting, Sushma, the character, is dissecting her complex relationship with this younger Neil. And it's fascinating because the word phir, then, is translated as but, right? Which changes the complete meaning of it, right? What happens is that she is, I'm reading the translation. Perhaps she was just an attractive girl to Neil. Perhaps he wasn't even clear on her age. He liked her. This thought was gratifying to her ego. But then, he was young. Sushma liked the clarity of his eyes, the openness of his laugh. Then is what is missing, right? She instead says, but he was young, right? So precisely his youth, which was making the relationship possible, is what she's seeing as a hurdle. So there are very fundamental points at which, these little inflections can really render the, subtle meaning. But it gets really bad in one story, which I will end with. It seems like I'm running out of time. Kafan, because the question of caste was raised. And this is a story that we teach, and we deal with, a particularly egregious act of what I will call, in an old-fashioned way, mistranslation, because it has to be called that. So you have the original where Madhu and Ghisu have eaten their fill. भरपेट खाकर माधव ने बची हुई पूड़ियों का पत्तल उठाकर एक भिखारी को दे दिया, जो खड़ा इनकी ओर भूखी आंखों से देख रहा था, और देने के गौरव, आनंद और उल्लास का अपने जीवन में पहली बार अनुभव किया. Right? This is the original. Now, how and why it gets translated as this, I'm baffled by. Having finished the meal, Madhu picked up the leftover puris and gave them to a beggar who was staring hungrily at them. So far, so good. But for the first time in his life, he experienced the pride and pleasure of drinking and being on a high. Dene, so, what this does is it further dehumanizes them. And this story has generated so much controversy around Premchand's alleged, hatred for these characters, and, we know that. It's a huge, huge issue. Of course, it's not just the English translation that has been critiqued, it's the Hindi original also, but the English translation just makes it worse. So these are the kinds of, issues of responsiveness and responsibility that I think translators have to work with, and which we have to deal with in the classroom. Now, this is in a course where students are not required to look at the original. Neither is the teacher. This is neither required of us in the pedagogic process, teaching, or in the examination. But we do, because we have colleagues like Dhananjay Kapse, who bring out these wonderful volumes where they produce the original as well, and we have a good time, discussing all this. But it raises very important questions. On the one hand, you are encouraging students to explore their multilingual abilities, right? You're bringing students, which was the original point of having this literature introduced in the first place. On the other hand, you have a highly heterogeneous classroom in which not everyone has access to Hindi. So imposing this as a pedagogical, exercise raises those other kinds of issues, which we have to also have to negotiate. So I'll just end there.
Thank you so much, Mayaji. If Thomas Hardy would have named your presentation, it would have been the prayers at the mantle of mistranslation. And if Sharad Joshi ji would have named it, he would have said, Rachna samajhni hai to galat anuvad padhiye. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I now invite respected Anamika ji. I was so lost in your paper. Anyways. Anamika, a Hindi poet and novelist, is a professor of English at University of Delhi. Poems from her National Award-winning poetry collection, Anushtup, Khurdri. Her latest novel, Trindhari Oat, reimagines Sita and Ram as a pair in a long-distance relationship, writing letters to each other, have been translated into English at Sita's Wheel, and she received the Sahitya Akademi Award of 2020. Ma'am, over to you.
A very warm good afternoon to all of you. I was listening to all of them intently, especially people who were pondering on the challenges of translating from Hindi into English. And I was wondering, why is it so very difficult to translate a rooted text of Hindi, into a language which is supposed to be tight-lipped? Perhaps because Khadi Boli Hindi or Hindi was the language of freedom, of our freedom movement, because it was assigned a role of building bridges. Most of our texts, major texts, play up to the egalitarian ethics of breaking hierarchies, especially texts like Renu's Mare Gaye Gul Farm, Tisri Kasam Mare Gaye Gul Farm that I'll be referring to, and Champa Kale Achhar Nahi Chinti by Trilochan. You know what happens? Not only these texts, but in most of the major texts of Hindi, you will see words from different registers. Tatsam, Tadbhav, Deshaj, Videshaj. Sitting on the same platform, same pangat. Sitting on the same mat, as it were. Chatting like eternal sakhis. And there is no sense of hierarchy there. Now, in texts like Mare Gaye Gul Farm, Tisri Kasam Mare Gaye Gul Urf Mare Gaye Gul Farm, you locate words from these four registers of Hindi. You see them sitting, not only sitting and chatting like eternal sakhis, but also rising to the occasion and start dancing. You know, some kind of a Bidapat Nach. I don't know if you know what a Bidapat Nach is. It's a kind of dance where two groups assemble. I mean, you form an infinity ring like this, almost flowing into one another. So the whole idea of words from different registers flowing into one another makes the text very difficult to translate. Because, you know, at least people like me, for whom English is, of course, the second language, it generates tension. you know, when it generates the kind of tension that Lokani dies of the yesteryears in our Mithila, you know, had when they were made to travel with the child bride to the new home, to the new linguistic environment. And the irony of ironies is that she was assigned the job of settling her down, but she was herself very new and alien to the new linguistic environment. Now, sometimes when even when you're operating in the same register, especially the Deshaj register, that Champa Kale Kale Achhar Cheenti, Nahi Cheenti, observe, has, even within the same register, the chit-chat, the tone of informal chit-chat is very difficult to catch. And let me read a part of the poem for you to understand what I mean. Just one bit. I'll take only 2 minutes. And उस दिन चंपा आई, मैंने कहा कि चंपा तुम भी पढ़ लो, हारे गाढ़े काम सरेगा, गांधी बाबा की इच्छा है, सब जन पढ़ना लिखना सीखें। चंपा ने ये कहा कि मैं तो नहीं पढ़ूंगी, तुम तो कहते थे गांधी बाबा अच्छे हैं, वे पढ़ने लिखने की कैसे बात करेंगे, मैं तो नहीं पढ़ूंगी। मैंने कहा कि चंपा पढ़ लेना अच्छा है, ब्याह तुम्हारा होगा, तुम गौने जाओगी, कुछ दिन बालम संग साथ रह चला जाएगा, जब कलकत्ता बड़ी दूर है यह कलकत्ता, कैसे उसे संदेशा दोगी, कैसे उसको पत्र लिखोगी। चंपा पढ़ लेना अच्छा है। चंपा बोली तुम कितने झूठे हो, देखो, हाय राम, तुम पढ़ लिख कर इतने झूठे हो, मैं तो ब्याह कभी न करूंगी, और अगर कहीं ब्याह हो गया, लैक ऑफ एजेंसी, तो मैं अपने बालम को संग साथ रखूंगी, कलकत्ता मैं कभी न जाने दूंगी, कलकत्ते पर बजर गिरे। Now Vajrapat, how she twists, she twists the Vajrapat, the Sanskritic elegance of Vajrapat ho jaye into Bajar gire. How do you retain? I mean, the same kind of register in Hindi. Champa gives a damn to the moral authorities not only of the author, but also of Gandhi Baba. And she says, and she's not like Lucy Gray. She doesn't radiate that kind of innocence. Younger in years than, I think, Mini in Kabuliwala, or the truck driver's daughter in Gulabi Churiyan by Nagarjun. She is though she is very younger than them, but younger to them, but still, she's very clear in her head that this business of reading and writing is no good if it does not offer her prospective husband the scope of employment at home. Why this hatred against Calcutta? From their dadis and nanis, all of us, not only Champa, all of us in the Hindi region have had, we've inherited a kind of fear against Calcutta. And also Rangoon and Karu Kamakhya and all such places of employment where beautiful damsels from Bengal and Assam and whatnot are supposed to be roaming about freely. And the tale goes that once these husbands migrate, they'll be tamed like yet another sheep in the fleet, and they'll never come back. Now, it is because of this fear that she says, she packs up all her hatred against this idea of migration. And she says, like with the rage of pure and potent rage of a Kali, she tears the whole Vajrapat apart into Bhajargire. And it's important to read. Now, how do I translate it? To hell with Calcutta. If I make it Calcutta or even Kolkata, the punch is gone. So it's very important to retain the double ta. Sanyukt Akshar makes a kind of joint Sanyukt Morcha against the whole idea of migration and reading and writing without any assurance of being employed at the place where you are homed in. So this is one example. The other example could be that, I don't have much time, so I'll only take the title of the poem, how challenging it was to translate the title. This whole juxtaposition of Mare Gaye Gulfam with the Tisri Kasam. It's in one go, in one breath, it collapses the idea of promise and the idea of, not keeping up to the promise. Now, there were two options for me that flashed in my memory, in the first go. First option of Mare Gaye Gulfam could be, we are done for Gulfam. But then I chose the other option, game over Gulfam. Because the whole idea of destiny playing a game against people who have never, who can not even think of playing a game against others, has been carried beautifully there. And like a prophecy, you're just packing up juxtaposition of the words of two registers or the phrases of two registers. They sound like the prophecy that the Greek chorus offers. It is a prophecy. You can't expect change in the life of the people coming from the subaltern section of society. It's not easy. And the first half, when I translated Tisri Kasam, I also realized that when words travel from one cultural context to another, when this voyage can also make the words seasick. I had two options, oath. Now, oath is shapat in Hindi, loosely translated. But the whole, the politicians, for instance, have been using this word in shapat grahan or oath ceremonies in such a vulgar way that I didn't feel like relating Hiraman's innocence with this oath. Now, wow, because it sounded very masculine, it sounded very pompous, it sounded very, rigid, legal, it sounded a stint of moral absolutism. It did not, it referred to one kind of masculinity that Hiraman doesn't have anything to do with. He is a tender person. He is, his commitment, silent commitment to Hirabai, and quiet concern for Hirabai doesn't match with that register. So I thought I'll go by wow. Now, wow is Pratishruti. Pratishruti as in Ashapurna Devi's Pratham Pratishruti. But like dramatic monologue, Pratishruti expects an audience. It is, of course, tender. It is pious. It's between two people. It's already compromised. It's meant to be kept, the promise. But, it's damned to be broken. All these connotations it could have carried. But in the story, I realized that there was no second person. The promise that was being made, I mean, like Tulsi Das in Vinay Pratika telling himself, Ablo nasani, abna nasaiho. Enough of it, no more of it. I've had it enough, no more of it. Hiraman seems to be telling himself, the ox is there, but he's a silent witness. It's not to the ox that he's talking. Bullock, he's not talking to the bullock. He is not talking to anybody but himself. And I thought I would use resolve, but then resolve also had the baggage, Sisyphean, it's of existential angst on its shoulder. It had the Sisyphean shoulder. So angst is something that would not have gone with Hiraman. So this whole story, to carry the nuance of this whole story of love story going nowhere from nowhere, had very limited choices, and I had to settle down for one. So these are the problems I have been grappling with, matching of registers. When I whenever I have translated these rooted texts, the whole idea of attaining linguistic clarity at the cost of aesthetic thinning has been a source of pain for most of us, all of us sitting in this hall. You're all stalwarts. I'm just a beginner. But still, I have, in my own little ways, I have been trying my best to retain the golden rib.
I'm very sorry.
From the original, yes, this is the last line. Original, and by way of Padarth Haran, or what Rajashekhar says, Sanskar Karma, or Anandavardhan says, Dhvani Santaran, I have been trying to evolve a way in which, parallel to what Marx refers to as the Asian mode of translation, production, we could evolve an Asian mode of translation where cultural parallels could be raised, keeping the Dhvani Santaran in mind. Now, Anandavardhan and Rajashekhar use it in a different context of intertextual dialogue between authors, but we can pick this up and evolve it into a strategy at some level, putting our heads together.
Thank you so much. It is the cruelest thing to do, but sorry, ma'am, with apologies. I made a mouse on your sleeve just to make you smile, and with a sorry. I invite Shri Harish Trivedi ji, who has been reviewing the book review since 1981. 44 out of its 50 years. He translated Amrit Ray's Sahitya Akademi award-winning biography of his father, Premchand, Kalam Ka Sipahi, into English as Premchand, His Life and Times, and has translated poems and short stories by Hindi, Urdu, and Sanskrit authors, including Premchand, Manto, Agye, and Nirmal Verma. He taught MPhil courses in translation studies at the University of Delhi for several years and co-edited with Susan Bassnett a volume of essays titled Post-Colonial Translation Theory and Practice. Of course, we read his preface in Chutnifying English. That's for the Legends and Books. He himself is currently being translated from English into Hindi and feels like a hunter hunted. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aditi. That's about all I've done, so I need not speak. That is right before you. One thing I will say about the book review and my old association, long association with it, it's been a lifelong companion for me, more or less. It's a journal I always wished to write for, and I think ever since 1981, I have written for it at least once, maybe more times every year, except perhaps for the 7, 8 years I was living abroad. I published my last review in it only a couple of months ago, and I hope to write a few more. It's wonderful to have a journal which one is keen to read month after month, and which gives one so much information through other reviews. And two other aspects of this old relationship are, I also edited a special issue on contemporary Hindi writing for this journal, which ran into 2 issues, 2 months. And
Collector's items.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've also been reviewed in the book review, and I haven't yet killed the reviewers. So it's been a multifaceted relationship. What I wish to talk about to you is, I've also been translating for about as long. I first published a book of translation in 1982. So there's a similar span. But very recently, I've changed my mind about translation. And this change of mind, or if you like, change of heart, is what I'd like to put before you. Not now for you to respond to it, but in case any of you are inclined to respond to it later and perhaps share your own responses with me. Maya talked about being pedantic in reviewing translations, and she gave some wonderfully pedantic examples of how one does it. As soon as you begin comparing the original with the translation, you will find only errors and only problems. I'm reading 2 translations at the moment. One is The Bride of the Hills by Kuvempu in Kannada, translated by Vanamala Vishwanath. And the other is a novel from Malayalam by Setu, translated by Prema Jayakumar, The Saga of the Muziris. They're both big fat novels. I cannot possibly read the originals, and I feel delighted. That part of the task is over. I will take the translations on trust. I do not read any translations from Hindi into English. It's not good for my health. Because the same kind of set of considerations comes in. I do read the introduction. I do read the notes, if any. I do read the glossary, but I leave the translations alone. This is my dusri kasam. So, what is the change of heart that I've arrived at? The book that I translated, over all these years, especially as teachers of translation or academics practicing translation, we are very keen on how the translation should be accurate, how it should be faithful, how it should not depart, how it should not have errors. Those are also the most grievous kind of departures. Well, errors are very often subjective. That's what I've come to. There are many options, and you can argue for one against the other and go on arguing. But what I have now come to realize is that there is a very strong case for not even attempting translation in that sense, in that pedantic sense. There is a strong case for calling it and thinking of it as adaptation right from the start. I'll give you an example of what I did when I translated Premchand's biography by his son, the authoritative biography which won the Sahitya Academy Award and which still stands as the great biography. It's said that in translation, the text expands by about 10 to 15%. It's almost inevitable. When I had finished translating Amrit Ray's biography of Premchand, it had shrunk by about 30%. How did I arrive at that? The Hindi text is 620 odd pages. My translation was 410 pages. I had a whale of a time doing it. Nobody has ever complained about what's happened to the rest of it. In fact, Nambar Singh, soon after it was published, said to me, Harish ji, aapne to Amrit Rai ka bada upkar kiya hai. You have done a great favor to Amrit Rai. Now, I corrected him. I told him that Amrit Rai himself had done this great favor. Why? The edited text that I translated was initially edited by him and then re-edited by me. And what was missing was very clear. He had systematically cut out certain things. The second bite of the cherry for the author. It published it 20 years ago. It's still a great work in Hindi, but in English it retains what he thought should be retained. I changed the title of the book, again with his full approval. I changed the name of the hero. In Hindi, it's not Premchand. Like a good son, he could not take the name, as we say, of his father, like a good wife as well, of the husband. Throughout, he calls him Munshi Ji in Hindi. I can't call him Munshi Ji in English. So I call him Premchand. The title has changed because he thought it didn't work in English. I thought it did, but then I bowed to him and I said, fine, we'll keep the title you like. Now, there's another example of this kind of thing. Aghe, the great Hindi novelist, whom many people regarded, those who are at least not ideologically very cutter, very committed, as the second greatest novelist after Premchand. He translated Jnanendra Kumar, and once we were talking about it when a reprint came out of that translation, and Aghe said to me, "Aapne dhyan diya hi hoga कि उसमें मैंने एक अध्याय छोड़ दिया है." It's a very slim book. It's hardly 100 pages. If you leave out one of the chapters, fantastic. Later he got working even better. He translated Godan by Premchand. Many people think it is the canonical, the greatest work in Hindi fiction. And he left out half the novel. He translated only the village part. He left out the urban part. Once I had to write an article on Godan for that 3-volume thing called Masterpieces of Indian Literature. So I was asked by K.M. Josh to write on it. And I calculated, and I found that if you make a very accurate calculation, you will find that the urban part is not small. The rural part is 55%, roughly, and the urban part is 45%. And he leaves it out. And when that novel is abridged for students, for children or students in the lower classes, again is the urban part that's left out. Now, what is happening? In all these instances, the translator, to the best of his ability and judgment, is realigning the translation for the intended reader. That, I think, is an extremely helpful practice. This idea of faithfulness, where does it come from? It comes from medieval times, feudal times, when wives were supposed to be faithful to husbands, and when unmarried women were supposed to be chaste. That's the metaphor. It's a highly anti-feminist metaphor. So we have still stuck with that. The reader whom you present, the edited work, the adapted work, will never know. The success of the work depends on what you make of it. It may seem Philistine, opposed to pedantic. These are the two options, polarized options. But you see, I mean, when I'm reading Kuvempu and when I'm reading Setu, Muzira's novel, what am I doing? I'm taking the translator completely on trust. One reads the translation just as one reads the original. Once you get into the novel of the poem, after a few lines, we forget that you're reading a translation. It evokes equal authority, and as I said, trust. Now, isn't it utterly irresponsible to say that a translator can do what he likes? In this case, let me say what she likes. Sounds better. Equal authority. Well, there are many ways in which adaptation, and this is the last thing I'd say, there are several ways in which adaptation is built into translation. And we call it translation most of the time, and we valorize the term translation because we haven't thought about how inevitable adaptation is even to the most faithful translation. Number one, for example, I mean, if you're translating from an Indian language, Hindi, for example, into English, things change all the time without you wanting them to change. The syntax comes in the way. The word order comes in the way. As we know, Hindi is a language in which there's the subject, and then there's the object, and then there's verb. That's not so in English. There's the subject, there's the verb, and there's the object. मैंने उससे कहा, I said to him. Crucially, the word order is different, and this is the simplest example. When you get into complicated syntax, when you get into sophisticated writing, the alignment of the sentence is completely different. This will have to change. Very simple example, again, I translated a poem by Kedarnath Singh. It's called JNU Mein Hindi. The title says enough, I think. JNU Mein Hindi. But when I translate it, it becomes Hindi in JNU. I don't want that transposition. But the shift change, the meaning shifts, the emphasis shifts, the paradox is reduced of what he's talking about. But there's no way. You know, there are many, many ways in which it will have to change. You cannot help it. And sometimes it's best to live with it, to make the best of your choices, and be aware of what you're doing. This is not even to mention culture, which is different. And if you do not make cultural accommodation in your translation, you are inviting the reader not to go ahead with reading it. How do you do it? There are several ways of negotiating this. This usage, idiom, which of course is very, very different. So, this cultural translation, what people call cultural, there are not only some words that are culture specific. That was the older theory. Kurta, pajama, maya, and so on. No. The more recent formulation is that in any language, every word is culture specific. Every word, to some extent or the other, is rooted in the soil that it comes from. So I think a translation policy, you know, how did I get this ilham? After having been a pedantic translator and reviewer, what happened? That now I'm crossing the floor. I am on the other side, more or less. Because I began to be translated. That was the acid test. Anamika knows about it. We're in the same boat, in the same project. I began my essays. Somebody said, you know, fiction is very difficult to translate, poems are very difficult. You try translating an academic essay. You will swear never to go near one either in the original or in translation. So, because the assumptions are so many all along. There's a different way of conducting an argument in different languages. Difference in persuasion. All scholarly writing is so deeply elusive without stating what the author is saying. So it is when I was translating Amrit Rai, I didn't have a care in the world. Why? Because I had the full support of Amrit Rai in what I did. We sat together on his white veranda in Allahabad and did things together. I translated, then we looked at it, we corrected the proof together. Now that is happening to me. I am far more sensitized, finally. You know, my essays have been translated into Chinese before, into Italian before, and I was very happy with them. But now that they're being translated into a language I can read, into my own language actually. English is not my language. Hindi is my language. I feel deeply offended on behalf of Hindi. Never care about the English. Let that go hang. So I am all for adaptation. I'm all against translation. I'm all against pedantry. And I'm all for freedom, especially when I am exercising it. Because my translators have produced a draft, and of course I'm not happy with it. So I'm working very hard to retranslate all that to my own satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Over to Professor Abdul Bismillah ji, who is a distinguished writer and an academic, widely regarded for his contribution to modern Hindi-Urdu literature. He has been associated with Jamia Millia Islamia, where he taught Hindi and was deeply engaged in literary scholarship and pedagogy. His fiction and essays are known for their sensitive portrayal of everyday life, social change, and moral worlds of ordinary people, often written with linguistic nuance and quiet realism. Professor Bismillah's work has received wide critical recognition, and he is counted among the significant literary voices of contemporary Indian writing. So, welcome.
थैंक यू। अभी तक सब कुछ अंग्रेजी में आप लोग सुनते रहे, अब थोड़ा सा मुझे हिंदी में बर्दाश्त कर लीजिए कि मैं हिंदी में बोलूँगा। ट्रांसलेशन पर इतना अच्छा ये सेमिनार हुआ, बहुत सारी बातें हो रही हैं। ट्रांसलेशन बहुत अच्छे भी हो सकते हैं, औसत दर्जे की भी हो सकते हैं, बुरे भी हो सकते हैं, ख़राब हो सकते हैं, लेकिन ट्रांसलेशन हमारी ज़रूरत है। अगर ट्रांसलेशन न हो तो हम जो है कभी कभी दावा कर बैठते हैं कि हमने बहुत सारी भाषाओं का साहित्य पढ़ रखा है, ये सब फिजूल हो जाएगा, कुछ नहीं पढ़ पाएंगे अगर हम ट्रांसलेशन न हो तो, ख़राब ही क्यों न हो, लेकिन उसके ज़रिए हम दुनिया की तमाम भाषाओं के साहित्य से जुड़ते हैं। हाँ, ये ज़रूर है कि ट्रांसलेशन जाहिर है कि मैं तो बहुत अयोग्य आदमी हूँ इस बारे में, क्योंकि मैं कोई ट्रांसलेटर नहीं हूँ, एक अजना सा लेखक हूँ, लेकिन अनुवाद पढ़ता हूँ, कुछ अनुवाद किए भी हैं मैंने, तो बहुत किए। तो अनुवाद करते हुए, अनुवाद पढ़ते हुए जो मुझे अनुभव हुए हैं उनको मैं शेयर करूँगा, और मैं खुद से अपने आप से शुरू करता हूँ। अभी अनिल साहब ने कहा था कि जीनी भी चतरिया की अंग्रेजी अनुवाद पर कुछ बोलिएगा, तो मैंने कहा नहीं, वो पहले बोल चुका हूँ इसी कार्यक्रम में 96 में जो, तो मैंने कहा उसे दोहराऊँगा नहीं, मैं दूसरी बातें करूँगा। मैं भुक्त भोगी हूँ, क्योंकि मैं लेखक हूँ और मेरी रचनाओं के अनुवाद हुए हैं, तो भुक्त भोगी हूँ। कैसे अनुवाद हुए, दो तीन उदाहरण दे रहा हूँ। अब देखिए, मेरी कहानी है हिंदी में, उसका शीर्षक है दूसरा सदमा। अब इस कहानी का उर्दू में अनुवाद हुआ। एक सज्जन ने जो दक्षिण भारत के थे, उन्होंने मुझसे अनुमति मांगी कि साहब हम भारतीय भाषाओं की कहानियों का एक संकलन पुस्तक छापना चाहते हैं, तो आप अनुमति दें तो आपकी कोई कहानी ले लें। किसी कहानी का नाम नहीं बताया उन्होंने, कहा कि कोई कहानी। मैंने कहा ठीक है, कोई सी भी एक कहानी ले लीजिए साहब। अब वो किताब छपी तो आई मेरे पास, तो दूसरा सदमा का अनुवाद छपा था उसमें, और शीर्षक दिया हुआ था दूसरा झटका। अब ये सदमा किस भाषा का शब्द है कि इसको झटका करना ज़रूरी लगा। अब मैं लगा सोच में पड़ गया कि ये क्या चक्कर हुआ। तब मुझे अचानक पता ही मैंने समझ गया कि दरअसल इस कहानी का अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद द सेकंड शॉक नाम से इंडियन लिटरेचर में छप चुका था। मैंने कहा वो ये हिंदी से किया ही नहीं गया है, ये अंग्रेजी से द सेकंड शॉक से इन्होंने शॉक को झटका बना दिया है। और दूसरा झटका, सोचिए कि लोग कहते हैं हिंदी और उर्दू में क्या फ़र्क है, दोनों का अनुवाद तो बड़ा आसान होता है। ये देख लीजिए आसान अनुवाद। और नतीजा ये हुआ कि वही कहानी अरबी में उसके अनुवाद छपा तो वहाँ भी दूसरा झटका नाम से ही छप गया, क्योंकि वहीं से ले लिया उन्होंने। तो अब आप सोचिए कि ये क्या हालत है मेरी। अब एक दूसरी कहानी देखिए। अभी एक मिली जो IIT में पढ़ाती है, कही थी कि अतीत जो भाव में जो कहानियाँ हैं उनका हम अनुवाद करें। उनका कीजिए। तो उसमें एक कहानी है, उस कहानी का शीर्षक है आधा फूल आधा शव। अब वो जाहिर जिसने कहानी पढ़ी होगी वो जानता होगा कि कहानी किस पर लिखी गई है। ये केदारनाथ सिंह पर लिखी गई है और केदारनाथ सिंह की कविता की लाइन है। बनारस नाम की कविता है जिसमें आता है कि ये शहर आधा जल में है, आधा मंत्र में, आधा फूल में है, आधा शव में। और चूँकि उन्हीं पर कहानी है तो शीर्षक भी मैंने ये दिया, आधा फूल आधा शव। इस कहानी का के दो उर्दू अनुवाद हुए। एक भारत में छपा, भारत की पत्रिका में। एक अनुवाद पाकिस्तान में छपा। पाकिस्तान में छपा उसमें शीर्षक यूं कहते हुए है, आधा फूल आधा शव। भारत में जो छपा उसका शीर्षक है आधा फूल आधा कांटा। कि क्या है? आधा फूल आधा कांटा। मैंने कहा यार ये शायरी से गुलो खार जो होता है ना शायरी में, ये गुलो खार समझ लिया कि गुल यानी फूल और खार यानी कांटा। अरे भाई ये शायरी नहीं, वो वाली शायरी नहीं है, गुलो खार वाली है। अब कौन समझाए? पाकिस्तान वालों ने नहीं बदला उसको, वहाँ की उर्दू पत्रिका ने नहीं बदला, वहाँ के एडिटर्स ने। हमारे यहाँ के एडिटर जो खुद कवि थे, जानते हैं हरीश साहब, हैं पटना हाउस में रहते थे। हाँ, उन्होंने पत्रिका वो छाप दिया और आधा फूल आधा कांटा कर दिया। अब बताइए साहब, अब क्या करेंगे? अब क्या करिए आप? अब रोए के गाएं, क्या करें? अब एक और उदाहरण दे देता हूँ। मीर अमन की रचना है बागो बहार, बड़ी प्रसिद्ध रचना है। अभी फोर्ट विलियम कॉलेज का जिक्र किसी ने किया था। अब देखिए कि बहुत सारे शब्द हैं जो, देखिए ये अनुवादक को ये सोचना चाहिए कि ये जो भाषा है ये भाषा किस युग की है। ठीक है हिंदी है, लेकिन आज की हिंदी और भारतेंदु के ज़माने की हिंदी में फ़र्क है। इसी तरह से आज की उर्दू और उस ज़माने की उर्दू में भी फ़र्क है। तो मीर अमन की किताब है बागो बहार, उसका लिप्यंतरण अनुवाद ज़्यादातर नहीं, मैं लिप्यंतरण उर्दू में, क्योंकि भाषा बहुत आसान है मीर अमन की। लेकिन कुछ जो मुश्किल शब्द थे उनमें निशान लगाता चला गया कि बाद में मीनिंग लिख देंगे। लेकिन मैं चूँकि पोलैंड जाने वाला था तो मैं जल्दी में था कि अब ये तक 18 तारीख को जाना है, तो हमने पब्लिशर को दे दिया। हमने कहा इसमें नंबरिंग तो है, मीनिंग नहीं दे पाया। किसी से कहिएगा लेकिन पूरा टेक्स्ट पढ़ के तब मीनिंग लिखे। अब लौट गया तो किताब छप चुकी थी। अब आजकल रिवाज ये है कि मीनिंग अंत में दिए जाते हैं, पहले तो फुटनोट नीचे दिए जाते थे, अब सब सारे फुटनोट अंत में दिए जाते हैं। अब उसमें बागो बहार में शुरू में ये जो मीर अमन है ये तो नौकरी की तलाश में दिल्ली से पहले पटना गए, अजीमाबाद कहते थे, वहाँ से कलकत्ता गए और फिर जॉन गिलक्रिस्ट को एक चिट्ठी लिखी अर्जी लिखी। तो उस अर्जी में लिखा है उन्होंने, खाविंद आप कदरदान हैं, हाजत अर्ज करने की नहीं, तारा इकबाल का चमकता रहा। अब खाविंद शब्द आया है इसमें। खाविंद संबोधन है गिलक्रिस्ट के लिए, खाविंद आप कदरदान। मीनिंग दिया हुआ है पति, यानी गिलक्रिस्ट जो थे वो बीरबल के शौहर हैं। अरे भाई, खाविंद फारसी भाषा का शब्द है और इसका ओरिजिनल अर्थ है स्वामी, मालिक। ये आदर सूचक शब्द है। ये पति के अर्थ में प्रचलित हो गया तो आप किसी को भी पति बना देंगे, हैं? तो खाविंद का मतलब पति लिखा हुआ है। अब बताइए, अब इस तरह के अगर अनुवाद होने लगे तो आप क्या करेंगे फिर, और हम क्या करेंगे? और फिर पाठक क्या करेगा, क्या सोचेगा कि क्या खाकर जो ये बैठे हैं अनुवाद करने के लिए, हैं? अरे भाई साहब, मेरे सामने चैलेंज आ गया। देखिए, अनुवाद जो है ना, ये चुनौती है, बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है और इसमें बहुत सावधानी की जरूरत होती है। मेरे सामने एक चैलेंज आ गया। एक हंगेरियन महिला यहाँ आई हुई थी, माया जोशी, जो वहाँ के विश्वविद्यालय में प्रोफेसर थी। तो वहाँ एक लेखक हुए हैं प्रेमचंद के समकालीन, मोरिस जिगमॉन्ट, उनकी कहानियों का वो अनुवाद करवा रही थी और ये हुआ कि छपेगा। तो कहानियाँ उन्होंने बांट रखी थी और अंग्रेजी वर्जन से अनुवाद करवाया और कुछ हंगेरियन से और फिर मूल हंगेरियन से मेल हो गया। 4 कहानियों को मैंने की है। अब एक कहानी का जब अनुवाद करने बैठा मैं, तो उसमें एक खेत मजदूर की कहानी है जिसका बाप है और बेटा है। बूढ़ा बाप है, एक बेटा है, पत्नी मर गई है, परिवार में कोई नहीं है। तो वो खेत में काम करने जाता है बूढ़ा, तो बेटा जो है घर से उसके लिए खाना लेके जाती है। जैसे फिल्मों में है ना, कुछ हीरोइन जो है खाना लेकर हीरो के लिए जा रही है खेत में, तो यहाँ बेटा जो है वो खाना लेकर जा रहा है। अब कहानी में ये लिखा हुआ है कि घर में कुछ नहीं था, घर में कुछ नहीं था, गरीब आदमी। कहा कि सेब के टुकड़ों का सूप बनाकर बेटा ले जाता है अपने बाप के सही। अब इसमें क्या परेशानी थी अनुवाद करने? मैं लिख देता था, मैं लिख सकता था कि सेब का सूप ले गया, लेकिन क्या हालत होती मेरी, यहाँ के लोग क्या सोचते कि सेब 300 रुपए किलो और गरीब आदमी खाने का ठिकाना नहीं है, हाँ, और कह रहे हैं सेब का सूप लेकर गए हैं। तो अब बताइए, गरीब कैसा गरीब है भैया? तो ऐसा गरीब तो हम भी हो जाए, अच्छा है, कम से कम सेब का सूप तो मिलेगा, है? तो अब कौन जानता है कि यूरोप में सेब सस्ता है, नहीं फ्री भी मिलता है। नहीं, फ्री इस तरह जैसे गाँव में, इस गाँव बाग में चले गए, आम के बच्चे जाते हैं, आम के फल गिरते हैं तो उठा ले जाते हैं, कौन पैसा मांगता है। तो मैंने खुद देखा है वहाँ पोलैंड में भी, रूस में भी देखा है मैंने कि वो सेब जब फलते हैं तो वो चिड़िया चूती है तो गिरते हैं सेब कच्चे कच्चे, तो बच्चे जाकर, औरतें जाकर सब भील जाती हैं जो गरीब के लोग हैं, और उन्हीं के टुकड़े काट कर वो उबाल कर पी लेते हैं, वही उनका भोजन है। अब ये वहाँ तो फ्री में भी मिलता है, यहाँ सेब का सूप कैसे पिलवा देंगे हम? अब मैं क्या करूं इसका? अब इसका क्या करें बताइए हिंदी में अनुवाद? अब मेरे सामने बड़ी समस्या, बड़ी चुनौती, चैलेंज कि भैया मैं क्या करूं। बहुत सोचने पर बचपन के दिन आए, तो बचपन मेरा वहाँ छत्तीसगढ़ मध्य प्रदेश की तरफ गुजरा है, तो वहाँ एक पेय होता है पतला जिसको पेज कहते हैं। ये संस्कृत के पेय से बना है, पेज। मैंने कहा लेकिन मैं पेज लिखूंगा तो ये छत्तीसगढ़ का आदमी समझ लेगा, मध्य प्रदेश का समझ लेगा, बाकी दिल्ली का कैसे समझेगा, यूपी का कैसे समझेगा, बिहार का कैसे समझेगा? ये तो नहीं समझ सकता कोई। बहुत सोचने के बाद साहब कुछ दिमाग काम नहीं किया तो मैंने खिचड़ी लिखा। हालांकि अब सोचता हूँ गलत अनुवाद है, तो खिचड़ी में भी कुछ दाना होना चाहिए, है ना, कुछ पतला पेय या कुछ लिख देना चाहिए था। तो यह गलती भी कर चुका हूँ मैं भी, मैं आज की तारीख में एक्सेप्ट करता हूँ। लेकिन पतला पेय भी पता नहीं समझ में आता लोगों को कि नहीं कि वो क्या पतला पेय था। तो ये सब चुनौतियाँ होती हैं और इनसे मैं गुजर चुका हूँ। अब मैं दूसरी बातें करने से पहले एक बात जरूर कर लूँ, वरना 10 ही मिनट है, 10 ही मिनट का टाइम दिया है। हो गए, बंद कर दें?
बहुत मजा आ रहा है।
2 मिनट नहीं, फिर ज़्यादा दीजिए। ऐसा है कि मैं एक ऐसे अनुवाद का जिक्र करने जा रहा हूँ जिसका मूल भाषा की पुस्तक मैंने नहीं पढ़ी है। मूल भाषा की पुस्तक मैंने नहीं पढ़ी है, उसका अनुवाद पढ़ा है। उसमें से मैं कुछ उदाहरण प्रस्तुत कर रहा हूँ, कृपया थोड़ा सा ध्यान दीजिए। माइकेल मधुसूदन दत्त बांग्ला के प्रसिद्ध कवि, एक काव्य उनका बहुत ही प्रसिद्ध है, मेघनाद वध, मेघनाद वध काव्य। हिंदी में जहां तक मेरी जानकारी है इसका अनुवाद नहीं हुआ है। इसका अनुवाद अंग्रेजी में, इंग्लिश में हुआ है। अनुवाद किया है विलियम रजिशे, हालांकि स्पेलिंग CE है लास्ट में, लेकिन इनसे चूंकि मैं मिल चुका हूँ जर्मनी में, तो जब मैं रजिशे बोलता था तो कहते थे नहीं रजिचे बोलिए, कहना मेरा नाम। तो उनका अनुवाद है, अनुवाद बहुत अच्छा है, इसमें कोई संदेह नहीं, अत्यंत अद्भुत अनुवाद है। लेकिन कुछ चीजों, कुछ जगहों पर खटकता है मुझे, खटका, वो खटकने वाली जगहों का उल्लेख करना चाहता हूं मैं। अब पहले ही लिखते हैं, बाय व्हाट ट्रिक डिड द enjoyer ऑफ उर्मिला। ये enjoyer ऑफ उर्मिला क्या है भाई? मैं खटका क्योंकि enjoyer ऑफ उर्मिला, भाई देखिए, राम को कहते हैं जानकी वल्लभ, जानकी के प्रिय, कृष्ण के लिए राधा वल्लभ, लक्ष्मण के लिए है उर्मिला वल्लभ, बांग्ला में रहा होगा बल्लभ। तो क्या नाम को भी ट्रांसलेट कर देंगे आप? ये प्रॉपर नाउन है भाई, ये एंजॉयर ऑफ उर्मिला। एंजॉयर मतलब क्या है? एंजॉयर ऑफ उर्मिला क्या? इतना खराब, मतलब इतना बुरा लग रहा है मुझे, पता नहीं आप लोगों को अच्छा लग रहा हो तो लग रहा हो भाई, मुझे तो नहीं लग रहा। एंजॉयर ऑफ उर्मिला, अब ये मतलब ये गलत। अब देखिए साहब, अच्छा अब नाम ही रखना है जब आपको, अब वृंदावन लिख देते आप, लिखते हैं गोकुल वुडलैंड। अबे क्यों? हाँ, आप वृंदावन लिख देते। अच्छा आप लिखिए नहीं, अब एक जगह लिख रहे हैं भिंडी पाल और डैश करके लिख रहे हैं मिसाइल, मिसाइल। अच्छा अब यहाँ पर वो फुटनोट दे रहे हैं विलियम से भिंडी पाल के बारे में। अरे किसने कहा था भिंडी पाल? मतलब लिखते आप, खाली मिसाइल लिख देते या कोई नेटिव मिसाइल लिख देते। भिंडी पाल भी लिख रहे हैं और नीचे फुटनोट दे रहे हैं। फुटनोट क्या लिख रहे हैं? इट इज नॉट नोन व्हाट सॉर्ट ऑफ वेपन दिस वाज एग्जैक्टली। अच्छा अरे यार मुझसे ही पूछ लेते, मुझसे ही पूछ लेते। ये भिंडी पाल जो है ये संस्कृत का शब्द है। भिंडी पाल संस्कृत का शब्द है और इसका अर्थ होता है गुलेल। गुलेल तो भिंडीपाल, ये माइकल मधुसूदन दत्त ने लिखा है, इन्होंने जो का त्यों भिंडीपाल रखा है, आगे मिसाइल लिख दिया है और नीचे कह रहे हैं कि इसका नाम नहीं पता, ये क्या किस तरह का हथियार है। अरे यार, गुलेल को कहते हैं, हमसे पूछ लेते, किसी से भी पूछ लेते। इस तरह की चीजें इसमें भरी पड़ी हुई हैं। अब ये कह रही कि बंद कर दीजिए। हाँ, तो अब ये देखिए, ये इस मेघनाद वध के अंदर शेषनाग को जानते हैं क्या लिखा है? किंग ऑफ स्नेक। अब शेषनाग लिखने में क्या दिक्कत थी? वासुकी लिख देते आप। हैं? राम को लिखा है बेगर राघव। अरे सन्यासी राम, साधु वेश में बन गए थे वो। अब ये सब बातें लिखी हुई हैं इसमें, मेघनाद वध में। तो अब सोचिए आप कि इस तरह के अनुवाद होने लगे। यही नहीं, अब अंत कर रहा हूं मैं, किताबों के नाम बदल देते हैं लोग, किताबों के नाम बदल देते हैं। अब आबे हयात, आबे हयात उर्दू कविता का इतिहास है, मौलाना मोहम्मद हुसैन आजाद का। हिंदी में जब किताब छपी थी, आबे हयात लिखने में क्या दिक्कत थी? अरे फुटनोट दे देते। वो नाम क्या रखा किताब का? उर्दू काव्य की जीवन धारा। अरे क्यों भाई, क्यों बदल रहे हैं नाम? रूसी उपन्यास है कुप्रिन का यामा, वेश्याओं के जीवन पर है, उसका अनुवाद हिंदी में छपा है गाड़ी वालों का कटरा। अरे भाई, यामा संस्कृत में भी है, रशियन में भी है। संस्कृत में यामा का मतलब होता है अंधेरी रात, और रूसी भाषा में यामा का मतलब है गर्त, न गड्ढा, गंदा, बचबचाता हुआ। अरे गर्त रख देते नाम। बहरहाल इस तरह की असावधानियां अनुवादों में बहुत हैं, बेशुमार हैं, और इनसे बचना चाहिए ताकि ये पाठकों के बीच मजाक का पात्र न बने कम से कम। हाँ, और लेखक को दुखी न होना पड़े। धन्यवाद।
बहुत शुक्रिया सर। मैं अगला आमंत्रण श्री अनिसुर रहमान साहब के प्रति। Anisur Rahman is a literary critic, translator, and bilingual poet in English and Urdu. Formerly a professor of English at Jamia Millia Islamia, the senior advisor at Rekta Foundation. He has worked and published in the areas of post-colonial comparative translation and English Urdu studies. His publication of the last decade include Earthenware, 60 poems, in translation, positions and paradigms, Hazaro Khwaishe Aisi, The Wonderful World of Urdu Ghazals, Socio-Literary Cultures in South Asia, Hazar Rang Shairi, The Wonder of Urdu Nazm, The Essential Ghalib, The Essential Mir. A winner of 2024 Sahitya Academy Translation Prize, Rahman Sahab has been a Sastry Fellow at the University of Alberta, Canada, and a visiting scholar at Purdue University, USA. Sir, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Aditi. It's very difficult to speak after Bismillah Bhai. We have been neighbors, and I'm very lucky to have him as a great friend of mine for a long time now. And I used to visit him quite often. And he was on a floor above me, and there was a room there which used to call Sahitya Kash. And in that Sahitya Kash, we used to often sit and discuss lots of things which he has already done today. Great listening to you, Bhai Sahab, aaj, phir se, bahut dino ke baad. Friends, it so happens that when I'm here, most of the time I have been sitting on this side of the room. And this happens to be a round room. So one doesn't know where is the left and where is the right and where is the east and where is the west and where is the north and where is the east. This happens precisely when you also translate. You don't know where is the left and the right of the text and how do you locate yourself in the north and the east of the text. This happens with me, this must be happening with you as well. So this is not an easy thing to do. Now, taking this metaphor of the east and the west and the loss of direction in this, our translator is often lost in finding his direction, but he has to find that And the success lies when ultimately arrives somewhere and can say with some amount of confidence that, well, I have done it and I have arrived. One doesn't know. It's the reviewer, the TBR reviewer will tell you later that, well, Mr. So-and-so, you have found it here and you have faulted there. But that's another story. It's a very happy occasion, in fact, I would like to say. This is very interesting to note that we have a publisher chairing a session and TBR at 50 trying to bring us together to think about translation. This is a very happy occasion. I would say rather that if you look at, try to scan whatever TBR has published so far as far as the reviews of translated works are concerned, this in itself is a good thesis point. You can just look at those reviews, and students who are around can probably do this. Look at, try to create, try to develop a content of how much TBR has done in terms of reviewing the translations and what comes out of it. So what happens here is something very interesting that is we are engaged with. As a multilingual and multicultural country, we are indeed translators all the time. And this is the point that I have been making for a long time now. We are essentially translators. And by extension, we are essentially comparatists. Although the parameters of both are very difficult to decide and very difficult to decide, to finally arrive at a conclusion. Before coming to this, Aditi, I was trying to develop, because you very nicely circulated what we are going to do here. So I thought, and I had my job ready with me. So I tried to think how many translation seminars, conferences, workshops, symposia have been held in the last 10 years. As a teacher, I've completed 10 years of my retirement, but luckily I have been receiving, or I don't know if it is lucky so to have that, but I tried to compile how many translation seminars, symposia, etc. have been done. And believe me, it is 100 per year that happens here. It's 100. It's done by the university departments, by other bodies like Sahitya Academy. Many of them have happened in Sahitya Academy. Then private conferences that you have, and you have these things happening in the colleges, and CLI has done lots of it, AGLAX has done lots of it. So where is the theory and where is the practice? It's very difficult to decide at this point of time. This was one part of it. Why so many conferences? If you look at the entire, say, the list or the listing of the seminars held in the country, why is it that translation sits at the top? This is an interesting point to discover and to ponder over. Similarly, I tried to look at the translations of Urdu poetry, and this was a project that I was doing about 6-7 years ago, so my data is not very current. And I found that 1971 onwards, 165 books of Urdu poetry in translation have appeared so far. Good translations, bad translations, very bad translations, and completely indifferent translations, all kinds of translations. It's a big number from 1971 to now. And you have 165 books in print by very well-known publisher, by lesser-known publishers, and by unknown publishers. This is the kind of a scenario that I have to engage with. You have prize-winning writers here, you have well-known writers here, and you have completely unknown writers here. Who takes the cake? Faiz all the time. Why is it that Noormi Mirashid is not at all talked about, who is a far greater poet than Faiz? I have no hesitation in saying Abbas. And Miraji, why is it no one bothers about Miraji? Miraji, whose name was not Miraji, it was because of that Bengali girl with whom he fell in love and called himself Miraji. His name was Sanaullah Dar. And because he fell in love with Meera Sen, so he chose to call himself. No one bothers about Miraji. Why is it? Because we as translators, not our only translators, we also have some kind of a critical faculty to decide what to choose. And in all these years that I have been talking about, it's essentially how we do, what we translate, how we translate, for whom we translate. All 100 seminars have been addressing these three questions essentially. How, for whom, and how do we choose our text and our authors. Now, we have had theme-based translations. For example, you have lots of translations coming together as partition stories or gender stories. I welcome these things rather than random translations picked without any kind of a planning. I understand now that we have reached a stage, we have done so much of translation. I would like to share, Harish, why this is one thing I would like to just throw before you, all of you, because you're all scholars of translation, students and translators all around sitting here. We have done lots of random translations so far without giving much thought to what we are doing, how do we choose our authors, what is the approach that we are trying to appropriate, and where do we go after that, who is my publisher, how is my publisher going to sell it out or to get it reviewed or to get it to the public. I understand that this is the time is over now of random selections. There has to be a full-fledged, focused translation area and project that we have to develop. It's rather odd to talk in first person singular number, but I take liberty and I would like to talk about first person in singular number. After doing this for about 30 years or so in the university, and all along let me also share, which I've also shared earlier, that teaching English literature, pure English literature, and American and Australian and Canadian, after 25 years I realized it was a very, very limiting experience. And I thought I would be able to realize myself if at all I came through my language to the English language or through English language to my own language. And that is when I postponed my lots of work that I had to do later, which I have done in the last 10 years. I'm talking in the first person, please excuse me for that, but I have to share it with the students who are here, not my colleagues who know this very well. So I decided later that I must do my translation work with some kind of a planning. And therefore my first book came out because I wanted to bring out my Urdu poetry to my English readers. Ghazal is the most talked about thing all the time. So I thought, let there be an anthology of the best ghazals, of the best poets who have 65 poets I could pinpoint, 2 ghazals each, and finally starting from Kuli Qutub Shah, Piya Baj, Pyala, Piya Jana to now 65. Now, if you read the introduction and go to the book, you will find that there is a page to each age, there is a page to each author, and then there are translations, rhyme translations, as I have tried to do. Got very well received, very well reviewed, etc. But my job didn't stop there. I thought, now let me come to Nazm. So I came to Nazm, that was Hazarang Shari, the wonderful world of Urdu Nazm. And I tried my hand right from 16th century, Kuli Qutub Shah to now. And that is how I tried to figure out what this Urdu Nazm is like. All variety of Nazm I have tried to put in there. Marsiya bhi hai, Qata bhi hai, Rubai bhi hai, whatever you can think of is there. The idea was to create a storehouse for those who work in translation and comparative studies and in South Asian literature and in translation in broader areas. I wanted to provide something for that as a material to work upon further. After finishing that, I thought, let me come to the canonical writers now. And I started an essential series. So in 2024, I published, my publisher is HarperCollins. I published with them The Essential Ghalib, which did very, very well. And if I look at the figures of sale, that is very, very encouraging. Selecting 200 verses only, sirf 200 शेर हैं, not translation. Unfortunately, all translators, all reviewers have said, बड़ा अच्छा translation है. No one bothered to write about what I'm writing on the other page. And that is very strange kind of a lacking on the part of it. Actually, I was translating, that was only 25% of the work. I was trying to develop a commentary on the verses that I was translating. तो उसका एक पूरा पेज तो commentary है. No reviewer looked at that. Everyone, अरे बड़ा अच्छा translate, rhyme कर रहा है. अरे भाई rhyme तो कर रहा है, वो तो गज़ल पढ़ लो उसके लिए. I tried to. So what I was trying to do, I was trying to create a storehouse not only of the ghazals, but also of the critical material that goes around that. Same thing I did with the next book, that is The Essential Meal, which has just come last month. And Harish Bhai was saying कि हमने तो 70-80 पता नहीं कितने कर दिए. So this is the book for you now, if you have, if you would like to, because you have written such a wonderful blurb for that, and you just missed because you had no time to write the foreword for that. Anyway. So here's an opportunity for you. Friends, that's how, speaking through my personal experience, I'm now working on the essential khusra. अब आप कहिएगा खुसरो का तो कलाम बहुत सारे होते हैं, लेकिन नहीं आप कहाँ से खुसरो को पकड़ पाएंगे, तो मैं कुछ कोशिश कर रहा हूँ that I reach to khusro somehow. Here is the publisher who must also know how this translation has to go forward. And here is TBR who must also find ways for us to make our place in their arena, and for them to seek their place through us. Thank you very much, friends. And because of the lack of time, I had many other things to share, but we'll stop there.
Very sorry, sir, but the only thing is 6 बजे light ना बंद कर देंगे.
I see.
So,
So
no, no. With all due apologies way in advance, Hina Hina ji is a professor in Department of English, Vivekananda College, University of Delhi. After her MPhil in English from the University of Delhi, she completed PhD from Punjab University. She's an academic, scholar, critic, teacher, and a translator. She has published more than 50 critical articles and translations. Her areas of interest are the partition of India from a historical and literary perspective. Uh, she translates from Punjabi and Hindi into English and has won several awards. Among these are Katha Prize for Translation in 1999 and 2001 and a Consolation Prize from Sahitya Academy in 2007. She was on the panel of jury members for Sahitya Academy Translation Prize 2008 in Punjabi and has been a part of several translation projects at the National Book Trust, Sahitya Academy, Center for Development of Punjabi Language and Culture, Punjabi Academy, and Center for Academic Translation and Archiving, University of Delhi. She has taught one semester course at Indian Institute of Management, Rohtak. Welcome, Hina ji. Thank you so much.
Killer panel. Thank you so much. And I promise I will not keep everyone waiting too long. So I'll just make my points in points. And I'm going back to what was originally the plan for the session that I was told, the idea of what is happening in Punjabi translation. And I just have basically one point to make. When I looked at the Punjab page of Incredible India initiative, the tourism initiative that we have, it says it's the land where rivers flow and history unfolds. So, being one of the places which saw the birth of one of the earliest civilizations of Earth, along with the Egyptian and Mesopotamia, this has been the cradle of a culture for a very long time, this region. And, there have been repeated ravages, repeated invasions and changes of regime, but also always very, very resilient revivals every time. And I think that is what has also shaped Punjabi literature in some way. And it reflects this very multi-layered history, because you have the Shramik, you have the Vedic, you have the Sikh, and you have the Sufi as well. And all of it is amalgamated. So most of its literature is very rich in allusions to various strands. And I think, of course, this must be a problem in translating from any other language, but I do find this a challenge in Punjabi. And why I think it's important, translation from Punjabi, because Punjabi, I feel that Punjabi culture constantly translates, into this very famed soft power that India has. And I think Bollywood exemplifies it to some extent, where Punjabi domination is certainly visible. And also in the popularity of Punjabi dance and music even today. So I'm just saying this to show how important it is to translate from Punjabi into English and also into other Indian languages. Now, Punjabi is amongst amongst the top 10 spoken languages in the world, with with about populations of 100 million to 150 million according to different studies. And in India, it's the 11th most spoken language, and about 3% of the populations in India speaks, which is about 31 million people. In Pakistan, because Punjabi, of course, belongs to undivided Punjab, it is the most widely spoken language there, and it comes to almost 48%. And if they include Saraiki, Hindko, and Potohari, it goes up to 65% of the population. Now, this is significant, and I'll come to that. But apart from this, there is a very, very large Punjabi diaspora, and it's about 3 to 5 million. It's probably one of the largest diasporic groups in the world. Now, what is problematic is that Punjabi literature gets divided because of the script into Shamukhi and Gurumukhi. And while Shamukhi script is, Punjabi in Shamukhi script is accessible to everyone in Pakistan, Gurumukhi, Punjabi literature written in Gurumukhi script is not available to anybody outside Punjab, or anybody who's been educated in, not been educated in Punjab. So earlier, we saw how Urdu became, was considered the language of the Muslims. By an equally untenable logic, somehow Punjabi got linked as a language, and also Gurumukhi with Sikhism. And especially in in census exercises, a lot of, because of the reform movements, Sikh reform and Hindu reform movements, a lot of Punjabi Hindus did not claim Punjabi as their language. So that also leads to a little skewing in the numbers. Now, well, so this is something that I think was important because the script divides the language here, and again, it's not very, the readership in Punjabi has always been comparatively lower in numbers compared to other languages. For example, Amrita Pritam also used to write, first publish her novels, although she wrote in Punjabi, she would get them translated and first publish in Hindi sometimes and then publish in Punjabi. So I feel that this is something important. And the point that I want to make is, and also see if it has a parallel in other languages, that when we translate from Punjabi into English, we are actually not translating for non-Punjabi speakers, we are also translating for Punjabi-speaking people, because a large number of Punjabis and Punjabi-speaking people do not have access to Gurumukhi. They do not know Gurumukhi. And I don't know whether that is the condition in other languages as well. But for Punjabi, it is certainly very, very true. Now, when we are talking of, obviously the politics of literature, of translation comes in, because what is going to be translated, and it's usually, when the decisions are taken, it's usually the high priests of the canon that are chosen to be translated, and the translator is almost like an acolyte who's supposed to bring their, great works into light, to global attention. Whereas translation, obviously translators are not always acolytes, and there are rebellious ones always, which happens. But how we choose what is to be translated comes to mind. For example, I'm just giving an example of a story which talks of the deras and the babas and how girls are exploited there. And when it was, the story was to be selected for an international publication, the editor felt that, it creates a very stereotypical image of India, and therefore one should avoid such a story and, maybe choose something else. I'm going to actually contradict this point, because by and large, we are looking at translation as a kind of homage. And we are looking at it as kind of, trying to create a meta-narrative apart from the meta-narrative that the literary canon would be. And in a way, it becomes an assertion of a constructed identity all over again. And the Punjabi character is shown as much larger than life, and, the sarson ka saag and the sarson ke khet, and, a very strong, very valiant people, very, fighters and so on. And voices that are not in consonance with this, or the entire marginalization of Dalits, for example, in Punjab, despite the very egalitarian religion of Sikhism, those voices, although they get translated, but they still remain marginalized. So I would say that it's important to keep those voices in the, all kinds of voices, of course, stereotypical as well as the non-stereotypical. And I think this point was made earlier, that we do need multiple translations of the same text, because we are approaching it from different perspectives, and it's important for those various perspectives to somewhere, help create that, that complete image, or as complete an image as possible of the culture of that region, which otherwise gets lost. As far as my own translation strategy is concerned, I'm not really talking about that. I would just say that I do like to add a little bit of Punjabi tadka to whatever I am translating, and I hope that works for everyone. Thank you. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Hina ji. I think the best panelist prize would go to you. You have blessed us with the timeline, but it's of course a lot is happening in Punjabi as far as the caste politics is going on. More on that in the coming days. As Rehman Saab just pointed out, that there are many conferences happening on translation, art, craft, science of translation across the country since last 5 years or so, and they've increased monumentally. 10 years. But what, in last 2 years, there's one word that had been repeated over and over again in all translation workshops, seminars, was rigmarole. I'm very grateful, relieved, thankful that this was never mentioned in this conference even once. Which brings us to our last station of this journey, that we have definitely found a method in this madness. It's not a rigmarole anymore. And from Urdu to Hindi to Punjabi to English, Of course, we are not going to ever see the Amrud the same way again. From holding a case for Bhojpuri and for women in Bhojpuri to going to a script that finds a better resonance in musical notes, to finding an apology for bad translations, to finding an impetus in and to get all the Deshaj, Videshaj, Tatsam Tadbhav on the same charpai, to finding an alignment, a translator allowing himself to find an alignment with the intended readers, to again an extended apology for bad translations, to an academic extending good translation for the commercial market, and to somebody who's trying to give a center stage to a language that has been usually extrapolated and over characters or stretched characterized, I would say, due to Bollywood and popular culture. um, we are all here to bring all these arguments under one umbrella of the book review. Congratulations, Chandraji. Your one mail and the whole industry comes together. That's some kind of goodwill, respect that we have for you for the TBR. Thank you for bringing us all together. Last remarks.
Thank you so much, Aditi ji. As I said this morning, this journey we could not have uh, gone through at all. And we would not be here today except for our lovely, lovely band of reviewers all over India, all over uh, the world, I would say, where from universities abroad as well. People write one email and they say, yes, for instance, the essential meal. Only this afternoon I got Asaduddin. He couldn't come for the conference, but he said, please send the book and I will review it. Because he has reviewed. Ji?
Devko, don't influence her.
No, but no, it's already, I had written to Asaduddin, so he has agreed. He did the essential Ghalib also. I think it makes sense for him to do both. But as I said, we could not have been here, we would not be here. I consider myself and Adnan and Uma as a kind of a post office. So where reviews come, of course, it's tremendous pleasure to sit and edit all of them and to put them together. And thank you, Aditi ji, and all the other chair who have done such a marvelous job today. And I look forward to tomorrow's sessions. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.